Karen, hey, congratulations for your film.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, it is Big Fight in Little Chinatown is being showcased here in Los Angeles at the Asian Pacific Film Festival. How does it feel for you?
Well, amazing. I'm a Canadian filmmaker, so this is my first time ever showing on the West Coast in the United States. And of course, the film being on the subject matter of Chinatown, it's so important to be able to bring it to the communities in some of these larger Chinatowns along the West Coast. So it's a huge honor to be part of the LA Pacific Film Fest, and also the film festival's philosophy around really making the screenings in community screenings. I'm really excited that there's going to be a panel after the film comprised of local Chinatown organizers, so we can localize some of the themes and the issues in the film, to compare it and talk about what's happening in LA's Chinatown in the present. So it'll make the screening itself more meaningful to the folks who are in the audience.
Now, what sparked you to do this documentary in the first place?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm half Chinese, and on my father's side, I'm fifth generation Chinese Canadian. So my family roots go back to the very beginnings of Montreal and Vancouver's Chinatown. And as a filmmaker, the very, very first film I made, which was a film about 20 years ago called In the Shadow of Gold Mountain, it was a film about the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act. And it was a film that I shot in those Chinatowns, and a film also that screened in Chinatowns across Canada. So on a personal level, I had a lot of family connection and memory, with regards to Chinatown, but also on a professional level, Chinatown is really the place where I cut my teeth as a filmmaker. And it was the Chinese Canadian community and the Chinatown community that gave me my voice. So, fast forwarding like almost 20 years now, I could see so many of these places that I knew and loved in these kind of periods of decline. And in the case of my Chinatown, like periods of active erasure. And I was concerned by what was happening. And also, because I've, had the privilege of being a filmmaker, and having films on television or whatnot, felt a real kind of role and responsibility back to my community, to tell the story of what was happening in these places. So that's kind of, why I wanted to go back into the Chinatowns and really explore, what we risk losing if these places disappear.
Did you grow up in a Chinatown, or you just frequently visit Chinatowns around different cities?
Well, both my grandparents were born in Chinatowns. Like my grandmother was born in Montreal's Chinatown, my grandfather in Vancouver's Chinatown. But of course, I grew up like in the suburbs, but Chinatown was and remains like a very big part of my weekly kind of life experience in the city. But of course, yes, so we would come into Chinatown every Sunday, to go for dim sum, or to go, to have family gatherings and things. And I remember experiencing the Chinatown as a child, especially, through these kind of like through walking with my grandmother through the neighborhood, and as someone who was born there, grew up there, she knew everyone there. So I would, going around Chinatown with her, everyone speaking Twice-a-Mise, welcoming us into these places. We would visit, relatives in the rooming houses or in the different businesses, and it was something that really struck me. It was like having the kind of secret keys to the neighborhood when you would go around, the neighborhood with my grandmother. And of course, being half white, usually if she wasn't around, people just handing me like a fork at the table to eat, so I really wanted to kind of capture that special part of Chinatown in a way, like the hidden Chinatown, or the Chinatown that's beyond the tourist facade that people know. And to really, the camera in the film literally goes, through doorways, down staircases, into back kitchens, into these special places where the soul of the community really resides. And it was important for me to be able to bring audiences into those places so they understand Chinatown is more than just a souvenir shop or a place to eat. It's really a place of community gathering, cultural production, memory, and meaning.
So all the Chinatowns that you present in your film all have personal connections: Montreal, Vancouver. But what was the connection with New York?
Well, New York, it was, in a way, it was no connection. Like it was. at the very beginning of the research for my film, there was a gathering happening in New York. It was a coast to coast gathering of Chinatowns against displacement. So it was like a gathering of 6 different Chinatowns happening in New York. And I thought, what a great way to start my research, like meeting 6 Chinatowns all at once at this one gathering. So, I went to the gathering as a filmmaker, but also on behalf of my own Chinatown, like representing Montreal. But of course, that gathering took place in March of 2020 in New York. So, I met people and I came back, and 3 days later, they shut down New York for COVID. And we all know what happened after that. But it was because I was on the ground in New York and I had managed to, meet May Lum and Gary Lum and kind of start those relationships in person, that I could continue them after, over Zoom, because the first 9 months of making the film, I wasn't even able to cross the border into the States. Vaccines weren't invented yet, the pandemic was on. And something that I initially thought, would just last a couple of weeks, we'd wait and then we'd go back. I mean, obviously, it took much, much longer and played out in such kind of brutal ways in Chinatown, where the neighborhoods became stigmatized. They had to deal with all the regular, business closings and health crisis and all that. But on, impact on top of that was the stigmatization, the racism, the violence that came out in these neighborhoods. So in a way, the COVID part of the story also made the storytelling just more urgent, and also really, kind of ironically paralleled the beginnings of these neighborhoods that were based and built on racism, right? So the story in the present had a lot of parallels are drawn between the present that was unfolding and this kind of racist past of the Chinatowns, but also the past of generation after generation fighting after these, or fighting against this kind of constant threat of erasure or gentrification.
Was there at any point for yourself that there was a fear that COVID was going to end your film?
Well, I mean, I think there was definitely a fear that COVID was going to end Chinatown. I don't know if it was going to end my film, or for me, it was that COVID was going to make it a very sad film. I remember there's one scene that takes place in the film at a dim sum restaurant in Montreal. It's a restaurant that I've grown up my entire life eating at. It's a restaurant where there is like lineups around, around the block to get in. It's always an hour wait to get into this place. And we went there at the height of COVID. And in Quebec, COVID was really the laws around COVID were very strict. For over a year, people couldn't have indoor dining. We were under curfew for a year. So I went into this restaurant that I'd never once in my life ever seen empty, and it was just abandoned. Like the tables were, the chairs were just stacked up, no dim sum carts. There was one guy in the kitchen, and Benny Sheck, who was the owner, kind of takes us on the tour of this restaurant, and he showed us the freezers. And for the first time, they had frozen their dim sum. This restaurant had never frozen dim sum before, because it's always made to serve. There's like 100 people waiting to eat it. It just goes right from the kitchen to people's mouths. And they were freezing their dim sum. And I remember almost having like a breakdown on that shoot, because I was like, oh my God, we're going to lose a Kim Fung. It's and it was something like a staple in my life that I'd grown up with. So it was important for us in the film, finally, when restrictions were lifted, we went on the very first day of the very first opening of this restaurant that had been, empty for over a year, and saw the community kind of come back. And so many people went back specifically there because it's a beloved restaurant, and just to see the kitchen come alive again. And the same thing for Wing on Woe in New York. We filmed with the family during this COVID period where they had been isolated, basically closed up in their store for almost a year. And then to be there on their first reopening and to see the community come back and to see how special these places are. On one level, yeah, it's a business, but on another level, it's like your family and your community's gathering space, right? And it's an anchor for people's lives in the neighborhood, because, the things they sell are affordable, affordable food or culturally appropriate, things. So, yeah, like COVID at one point, I was worried. I mean, we were documenting, but I was hoping like we would be able to turn the corner in the neighborhood. But you didn't know. Like for me, the COVID thing was like, will these neighborhoods survive? And it was hard, like Peter Lee and Hop Key in the basement. in New York, there, like that business was very close to totally going under, and it was Jan Lee who's the landlord of that business, because they have such a long-standing relationship, kind of like just, you know, uh, forgave them on the rent kind of thing, knowing that at some point they would pay him. And it's only those kind of relationships that exist in a Chinatown that help those businesses to survive. Because when it's like a faceless landlord that just owns a building for profit, they don't know the people, they don't know the tenants in the building, it's easy for them to evict folks who aren't paying the bills, right? But when it's someone that and you've known for generations, like that, that to me is the human scale of Chinatown, and how it becomes a community, not just a place where, economic transactions are happening.
So in some Chinatowns, they have successfully fought against gentrification, like Los Angeles or San Francisco. What do you suppose that they need to change to be like those Chinatowns? Because, like, for example, I'm from Fresno, and our Chinatown, the Chinatown in Fresno, was targeted for high-speed rail and was going to wipe out all of Chinatown. But today in Fresno, in that Chinatown, there's only one Chinese restaurant in all of Chinatown. So it's not really a Chinatown anymore.
Yeah, no, and what you're saying is like the fate of so many Chinatowns, right? Like we talk about the kind of Chinatown life cycle in the film, where there's like this, budding stage where there's like an anchor restaurant or an anchor business, the blooming stage where like everyone kind of comes around, and then there's this, period of decline stage where it's like, will it grow back up again or will it disappear? And a lot of Chinatowns these days are at that fork in the road, And what to me, like traveling to all the Chinatowns, it's really seeing them as ecosystems, and all these different elements of the Chinatown are what keeps a healthy ecosystem. Does the Chinatown have a lot of residents? Does it have a lot of businesses? Like all these things feed into the ecosystem of what makes a good Chinatown. So when I go into these places, if I see grocery stores, if I see eye doctors, if I see, ironically enough, in New York, the fact that they had funeral stores there, like Asian funeral stores or Chinese funeral stores, where they had those paper items that you burn, the incense, all the things to do with like the Chinese funerals. To me, that meant that the community was alive, because the residents are practicing their cultural rituals in the neighborhood. And then, if you go to like Montreal's Chinatown, my Chinatown, there's a lot of keychain stores and bubble tea shops, or like tourist t-shirt places, things that are tourist facing, or like these hipster or Asian fusion places, whatever it is, for rich folks who don't live in the neighborhood, for tourists who also don't live in the neighborhood. When the Chinatown becomes this kind of, Disneyfied facade that just, when the shop close at 5 p.m., the whole place is closed, it's like a set. Then the ecosystem is not as healthy. So, to me, what keeps these places in lock is really kind of like the residential base is so strong. Like if there's a lot of seniors living in that community, there's a lot of residents in that community. Their grandchildren visit them on the weekends. They go to Chinese school. They eat at the restaurant. There's this whole kind of circular economy that happens when you actually have residents in the Chinatown. And of course, during COVID, all these Chinatowns that became very tourist facing, or the revitalization plans where it's like, oh, let's paint this bench red for the tourists and make it, that tourism totally dried up, right? During COVID, there was no tourists. And the only thing that kept a lot of these neighborhoods alive were the residents. So it's important that when we come up with like these revitalization plans of how to, shepherd or steward Chinatown into the future, that we take into account the needs of the residents. And like, we follow Camwai Dim Sum, this frozen dim sum place in Vancouver's Chinatown. And arguably during COVID, their frozen dim sum business was the most successful business in all of Vancouver's Chinatown. And why was that? It's because they were community facing. Like their business model is for the community. They make affordable food in a community where there's tons of low income people, marginalized people, people who are standing in a line, when the social service comes. So to be a business that makes affordable food and gives folks the dignity to be able to buy their own lunch for like $2, be full, be healthy, on one level, yeah, they're selling frozen dim sum, but on another level, they're an anchor for that community and they're a piece of stability in that community. And, Kamwai Dim Sum, that family that owns that restaurant, they could easily move out to the suburbs of Richmond, build a big dim sum factory, have a dim sum empire, become like multi millionaire billionaires, but they're committed to Chinatown and very consciously and purposely stay in Chinatown, keep their prices low because they know all the people around them need food that's affordable. And they have become a success story, a business success story through that, through like the $5 lunch that can feed, two people. Like it, and so you don't need to be serving these like Asian fusion hipster $50 plates as a
Mm.
business model to be successful in Chinatown. You can make affordable food for low income residents of the neighborhood and be very successful because everybody in that neighborhood wants that business to be there.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And Karen, for yourself, what's coming up next for you? Are you just continuing to promote this documentary, or you have other projects lined up for already?
Well, for now, the documentary is just kind of embarked on like the LA Pacific Film Festival as part of this coast to coast in community tour that we're calling it. Like the film is going to screen in Chinatowns and communities all across Canada and various cities in the States. We're taking the film and bringing it back to the community. So, usually I don't take as much time with a film, like to kind of tour with the film, but this film was very special and close to my heart. And, the communities gave us their stories to be able to make the film. So what a privilege it is, and how amazing is it, to be able to bring the film back into the communities, because I made this film not just to be seen but to be used, so the folks on the ground could use it as a tool to advocate for the challenges in their Chinatown, and to use it as a kind of dialogue piece to kind of have those discussions about the future for their neighborhood. So that's what we're doing. Like we're going to be touring into the fall with the film.
Most excellent. One last thing before I let you go, Karen. Audiences everywhere is going to have a chance to watch Big Fight in Little Chinatown. What is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me is for people to, walk around their city with a critical eye, and not even necessarily Chinatown, but look around the city, look at the empty lots, ask questions, who is getting displaced, who is allowed to stay, how does this real estate speculation happening on this empty lot, how is that robbing the community of its future potential? And why is it the freeway or the light rail got put here, the stadium got put here, the prison got dropped there? Who lived there before, and why were those choices made? I think really looking at your city with a critical eye and asking the questions, who are we building the city for, and who do we want to build the city for into the future, is one of the biggest takeaways for the film.
Most excellent. Well, Karen, you've done a wonderful job on this film. I want to call it a community film. So, hey, congratulations once again. Thank you for the conversation for Big Fight in Little Chinatown.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Take care.